Welcome, everyone. We will give everyone about another minute to join our session this morning. So likely to start at about 9:31, just giving as much opportunity for as many people to join. So we'll be back very, very shortly. Welcome, everyone, to this Morgan Hunt Financial Wellbeing webinar. Great to have so many of you with us this morning. We plan to discuss how to build financial resilience for teams and individuals with expert insights on workplace financial wellbeing. My name is Claire Canary, and I'm a board director of Morgan Hunt, and I lead on diversity and inclusion. Morgan Hunt is an award-winning recruitment specialist business with teams in Glasgow, Birmingham, Manchester, and London. We were founded 30 years ago, and we recruit across the not-for-profit, further education, finance, government, professional services, property, housing, social care, and IT sectors. Long list. I am delighted to be joined by two expert speakers this morning. First, I'd like to welcome Kingsley Taylor, who runs his own coaching and training business, Reframe Coach Mentor. Kingsley works with the CIPD as a leadership and development associate and has held senior corporate roles, including CEO of Citizen Advice. And we're also joined this morning by David Pugh. David is managing partner at Lemonade Reward with over 20 years expertise crafting impactful employee benefit strategies and working with some of the largest UK companies. He specializes in financial education, and David's passion lies in empowering employees to make informed decisions about their finances, improving well-being and financial security. So before we kick off our main conversation this morning, just a quick note on our kind of format and the session, really. This will be about an hour, so we'll be live until 10:30. And our main discussion will probably take about 45 minutes, with about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions. But please post any questions you may have on the YouTube chat function at any point in our conversation. We will see them. I will endeavour to cover as many as possible at the end of the session. But like I say, as you think of the question, please post and we'll go from there. So to kick off our kind of chat this morning, Kingsley, if I could go to you first of all, financial well-being and mental health are deeply interconnected, and improving one can positively impact on the other. So would you be able to give an overview, just as a kind of starting point, in your experience, how financial stress can negatively impact on a person's health?
Thank you. Good morning, Claire. Good morning, everybody. It's well documented, as you say, that financial well-being and mental health are deeply linked. I was looking at Mind. I'm sure everybody's aware of this, that the Mind is the mental health charity, and they talk about actually poor mental health means managing money is harder, but worrying about money makes my mental health worse. And we can almost get into this cycle where we've got the two things start to interact with each other. We can also find that it can really cause stress, and it can also have an effect on people's relationships. And I'm sure we'll talk about this over the next hour. To what extent do we share our worries with other people? But from an individual point of view, it can really help and really hit your confidence and self-esteem. And I found that, particularly working with the charity that you mentioned, Citizens Advice, many of the clients that we saw it had taken a real hit on their confidence. And part of the work that that charity and other people that do help people is trying to give people ways forward that helps to build confidence and helps to build self-esteem. But absolutely, the two are absolutely interlinked between each other. And I'm sure we'll return to that theme throughout the next hour.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that, the kind of piece around relationships, because actually money can be one of those things that when people are in relationships, they don't really share a lot about or talk about. And that,
Absolutely, yes.
yeah,
Yeah, and
negative
if you
way.
look at another organisation like Relate, on
Yeah.
their website, again, they absolutely talk about that when relationships start to break down, not just money, but the not talking about money and the lack of communication around finance can be a real issue in relationship breakdown. So we really need to take this seriously in a really holistic point of view.
Yeah. Thank you, Kingsley. And David, from the perspective of what you're seeing with employer organizations and those that you at Lemonade work with to engage with financial education with their staff, what are the benefits that you can see to those organizations and I suppose more importantly to their workforce, um, that the workforce see from these financial well-being strategies?
Yeah, good morning, Claire. Thank you. I mean, building from what Kingsley said, he's referring to relationships. Well, we have lots of relationships, and you've got a relationship with your work, your employer, your colleagues. It has an impact on all of this. But if we can put in place strategies to help, then ultimately we're trying to build employees' financial resilience, and that will mean different things to different people. But if we can do that, then we'll build their confidence, we'll lower their stress, and ultimately that will help their mental well-being. And there's lots and lots of kind of stats out there. I'll just share a slide, which back this up. And if you're making the case within the business to do something about this, normally you do need to build that business case. So we do know that this impacts a lot of people. Most people are looking for support, but most people don't get it. But ultimately, the advantage for the employer is if people are in a session, it could be a session like this, and I'm talking to the audience. You might not be thinking about the session right now. You might be thinking about your mortgage, your children, different financial things. So the more we can alleviate that, the more people can focus on doing their job, which ultimately will help the productivity of the business.
Yeah. I mean, those statistics are pretty striking. 65% of employees saying that they want more support or more education, yet only currently, I know that's 7% of employers offer it. That's a massive gap. Are you, though, because I think this is in the news and I think more people are talking about it, and with the cost of living crisis, etc., are you starting to see that kind of swing a bit more, that more employers are reaching out to Lemonade to talk about how they might set up financial well-being support within the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, they are. I mean, we founded Lemonade 10 years ago, and this was all very new back then. And over that 10-year period, a lot of companies have put in place some really good stuff, particularly the bigger companies, but it is taking a long time to trickle down to the smaller, medium-sized enterprises. So it's about having a champion within the business, perhaps, to lead on this. And it's having that kind of bandwidth to do something about it, even though this has been really front and center for the past 2 or 3 years, because you can't turn on the news without the cost of living crisis being it might not be the headline, but it's pretty much in there every day. So yeah, I think more needs to be done is the key takeaway.
The key, yeah. And David, kind of following on from that, of the organisations that you do work with, because you're working with a lot of employer organisations across the UK, those organisations, those HR teams, what kind of strategies can they employ if they want to bolster support for financial well-being? What's a good starting point in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, I think anyone in the audience from HR will be particularly aware that there's 4 pillars to well-being, and finances are just one of them. So I'd encourage you to think more holistically about how this fits into the bigger picture of physical, mental, social, and financial well-being. And if there is a champion in the business that can run with this, that's brilliant. most companies we work with, they don't have a dedicated person to own this as a, if you like, a job role. But you don't have to be in HR, you don't have to be in finance to have a passion for this. And so maybe you can find an advocate who can, take this and run with it. But when we actually deliver solutions, we're kind of break it down in one of two ways. You could either take a product focus. So you could focus on how to manage debt, how to build savings, family planning, that's of the, thinking about losing an income, and maybe protection for a child rather than the other kind of family planning, mortgages, pensions. But one of the problem when you do it on a topic-based theme, let's say we talk about pensions, the narrative needs to be very different if you're talking to a 20-year-old, to a 60-year-old, to a 40-year-old. So at different stages of your journey, what's relevant will change. So pension will be important throughout, but you don't want to talk about to a 20-year-old about how to spend the money. It's more building in the basics of how to build the pot. So another way of doing it is taking a life stage approach, and you can divide the workforce into 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of discrete, we call them avatars or personas. You can give them a name, and then you can kind of bring out what topics people are interested in. So typically we'll break the workforce down to kind of young, free and single, or starting out, then maybe young family, then mature family, then pre-retirement. And there'll be different topics that will be relevant. So again, we might talk about pensions in all of those, but it'll be a different theme. But more importantly, in the starting out, we can focus more about how to build a deposit. And it might not be a deposit for buying a house. It might be a deposit for renting somewhere, actually leaving, the parental home for the first time. So taking a life stage approach can work really well because you can cover a whole range of things that are relevant to each person at each stage.
Yeah.
Then in terms of how we deliver that, there's all sorts of different tools, strategies you can adopt. Some of this will depend on whether there's a budget. Kingsley's going to talk more about where freely available resources are, but typically we get engaged because companies want to do more. They want to have a program, typically over 12 months, refine, adapt. It works really well if you can take the pulse of the workforce before you start, actually find out what is relevant to them, what issues are keeping them awake at night. And then from that, just building it out in terms of presentations, webinars, thinking about the population you're talking to. Does it work better to do it face to face, do it remotely, do it through videos, websites, etc. So there's many solutions, but it's first of all thinking about what do employees want.
Yeah, that gives a good overview. Thank you, David. And Kingsley, there's likely to be a large number of maybe individuals who are listening to this session or tuned in, and they may not get much in the way of support, unfortunately, from their current employers. So from your experience, what are the kind of wider external resources available to individuals that, they're just not aware but might be out there to support financial well-being?
Sure. Well, some good news, and sometimes when we talk about financial well-being, it's not always good news. But the good news is there are a number of organisations out there that can help, and I'm just going to highlight 5 that may be particularly useful to some of the people who are individuals, as you say, struggling, worrying, and thinking about their financial well-being. I guess the first one I'd talk about is an organisation called MAPS, which is the Money and Pension Advice. This is actually a government-funded free advice. So nobody's trying to sell you anything. Nobody's trying to recommend products. This is the government actually pulling together lots of best practice. And they've got really good online tools that actually help people, things like budgeting, looking at the debts that they might have, prioritizing those debts, which I'll talk about a bit later, which is really important. If you've got debts, not all debts are the same. So talking about prioritizing debts. And these websites and tools online can help people input themselves with the particular areas that are concerned. Okay, so that's a good place to start, the Money and Pensions Advice MAPS. Another one that an organisation I used to work for, which was Citizens Advice, 24 hours a day, you can get them on the website, citizensadvice.org.uk. But they've also got 280 local branches throughout the UK. So you can actually go in and see people or speak to individuals on the telephone and actually book an appointment where you can get free expert advice from highly trained people. And again, it is completely independent. It is a charity. It's not owned by the government. It is a charity. So you're speaking to an individual, and from my experience, there's almost a cathartic part of this. Somebody who can actually sit down with somebody face to face or on the phone, talk about the issues that they've got, and together come up with an action plan in itself actually helps an individual move forward. Because no matter how desperate the situation is, if people have got a plan and a way forward and they can see their next steps from a mental health point of view, this is a huge step forward. So citizens' advice, I'd say, would definitely be a port of call. Thirdly, and this is a commercial organisation, it's moneysavingexpert.com, but it's run by somebody I'm sure we all know called Martin Lewis. You can see him on ITV, you see him on the BBC. So yes, it's a commercial organisation, but there's lots of really good practical help in there. For instance, it's a practical guide I was reading the other day, which was how to stop spending, which is very, very in your face, practical, challenging, actually saying to people, why are you spending money in certain areas? Now, clearly, if you're heavily in debt, a number of these areas you're already stopped. But for a lot of us, it's quite a useful thing to actually reflect on just over a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, the money that we're spending on. So there's very much practical tips on there. They also go through the products that are available and they give best buys. So yes, products are recommended, but I think it's one of those more trustworthy commercial sites. Then CIPD, you mentioned that I work for the Chartered Institute of Personal Development. If you're a member, there are lots of free information on the site, and if you're not a member, there's still free pages. So whether you're thinking of help for an individual or some of the things that David's talking about, putting together a financial well-being plan for your organization, there's some really good tips on that. And the final one is, I mentioned at the start, mind.org.uk, the mental health charity, because we know there's this real link. And again, they've got some very practical tools to help you budget, which is something else I know we're going to talk about in a bit more detail later on, but also when not to spend money, particularly if you are going through a period of particular mental health anxiety. And again, some very practical tips that I would really recommend people have a look at. So those are 5 organizations that are out there. And if you just Google locally, throughout the UK, there are local, particularly debt charities and faith-based charity. Christians Against Poverty is one that's well known, but there are actual other faith-based charities out there in the local area that can give help and support. I can also signpost people to things like food banks and other organisations that can really help people on a very practical basis if they're needing real help and support.
Yeah, I think just one of the things you mentioned really struck, and kind of following on from what David had said, that financial finances is such a key pillar in your well-being, and then we know that negative effect it can have on your mental health, which is another pill. So it's such a massive part of your well-being. But you saying just speaking to someone can be cathartic, because yes. I think sometimes there's a lot of people don't open up about it, or maybe it's pride, or maybe it's pride that you've got into debt. Not that that's a judgment, but for some reason we sometimes can feel that we are being judged because we're in debt, even though it's challenging out there right now. And there's a lot of people across the country in a similar situation. So that's really interesting.
And again, to back up the point that David was making, a couple of the other pillars you talked about, one was social, which feeds into directly that bit about actually talking to people, and the physical bit. And again, on Mind's website, they talk a lot about the importance of thinking about your physical fitness again. So it's absolutely all tied together, this.
Yeah. Thank you. And In terms of, you mentioned it, practical tips
Yeah.
that you might have for individuals in terms of the basics, if they're really struggling right now,
Yeah.
and the budgeting. I think it has to start with budgeting and then kind of managing debt. They kind of go hand in hand. So what tips have you got in terms of those things
Sure.
to start off?
Well, I think the first one is don't bury your head in the sand. I think many people do that. There's no judgment here, because I've done that in the past, and I've been through stages in my life where finances have been very tough. And I think I can certainly empathize with people wanting perhaps to ignore it, move on to other things. Let's use the credit card. Let's not actually get into dealing with some of the basics. So I'd say the first is don't bury your head in the sand. And I would try and avoid not sharing with a trusted partner or a family member. Actually sharing it with somebody who's a trusted family member or partner can help. And actually, if you don't, you're actually starting to build up quite a lot of stress, which in a very stressful environment is the last thing that you need, actually. Yeah. So actually really think about what are the areas that you can start to de-stress on. Okay. So I think practical steps as well, because we often had clients who would come in with a big carrier bag full of envelopes, printed emails. So again, a good way of de-stressing is to say, for each of the particular areas that I might be concerned about, what's just the latest letter? What's the latest email? Rather than carrying physically and mentally all these letters and emails round in a bag, let's just deal with the latest piece of information, because if you're seeking help from somebody externally, that's the key thing that they will ask for. What's the last letter you had? What's the last communication you had? So I think practical steps, number one, have a really honest look at your current situation. Are you in control of your money? And some of us would answer the question no. And I can certainly empathize with that in certain parts of my life. So I think the first thing is to try and get this control. And you mentioned about talking about budgeting. Yeah. So 3 bits of paper, A4 bits of paper. On the top, one could be income, or even more basic, what's coming in. Expenditure on the other, what's going out. And on the third, debts, what do I owe? And can we get a clear picture? And this is why sometimes talking to a partner or a trusted member, having somebody with you to ask those questions. Are you sure that's the final figure? Yeah. Having somebody with you can be really, really just giving you some support. But if you're doing it yourself, getting it clearly down on a piece of paper, because actually sometimes that brings the stark reality of where you are, but it also starts to give you hope, because if we're clear and we've got some control on where we are at the moment, that's our starting plan for our action plan. So actually we're taking the first steps to actually move forward by understanding where we actually are. Then, as I said, gathering the latest piece of information for our income, our expenditure and debt, again, gives us clarity. And some of the organizations that we've mentioned, like MAPS and Mind and Citizens Advice, actually provide a calculator. So we can start to input some of this information into a free resource that can start to help us order it. We can also start to see on those organizations that I've mentioned if we've got an opportunity to increase our income. Are we actually claiming or looking at areas that the government can actually help us? So, for instance, many people, 10 million people in this country, have actually got access to universal credit. So if you're not looking into that, then you're missing out on a huge piece of help, support, income that could help you. So really making sure that you're aware of the help that's out there to boost your income, and then looking at your expenditure, taking a tough look, and perhaps reading that article that I talked about on moneyexpert.com. Why are you spending? How can you stop spending? What are the areas in your life that actually we could start to take out? Even if it's just for a short period of time where we're spending money. And I think we've all, through COVID and with the financial crisis, many of us have been through this loop of looking at how can I reduce my spending, whether it's the supermarket we go to or changing suppliers on energy. But then looking a bit deeper, actually fundamentally, where is the money going? And after looking after the house and the rent or the mortgage and the heating and the lighting and the food, what are the other areas that are absolutely essential? And are there ways of actually looking at some of those other areas of spend to say, can I take something out? And then I guess finally, if we're looking at an area around debt, it's starting to say, how can I get some help and support? And there are organizations out there that will, first of all, help us prioritize debt. And then secondly, come up with a plan to start tackling some of that debt. So we can't solve things overnight, but we can start to take the first steps. And from a mental health point of view, when people know they've got a plan, they've got other people involved, whether it's a partner or somebody in the family or a friend, and they've got an external organization supporting them, they feel that they've really taken some positive steps here.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Kingsley. And just again, all the organizations and the links, we'll send those out afterwards. Yeah. So don't worry if people haven't caught them. And I think the big one there is, I think you mentioned it, not all debts are the same. So
no, they're not.
Someone who understands that,
yeah.
They can put that into perspective for you and help you prioritize rather than worrying about all the debt, thinking, what is the crucial stuff and where do I need to start?
Yes, and I'm sure David will talk about this. One of the things all those external people will say, no matter how little money you've got, what are you going to start doing to start saving? Because even if it's £1 a week, that's £52 a year we've saved, particularly for issues that we can't plan for. And we have to start a way of people putting money aside, whether it's to do with the boiler might go or your car might fail the MOT. So essential things that you have, we have to find a way of saying, how can we start a process of putting money away that's really going to help with those things? And the future, which I know David will talk about as well. Things
Absolutely.
Like pensions and things like that.
Yeah. So that kind of brings me on to that, David. I mean, I think it has, as Kingsley says, kind of needs to go hand in hand, because if you're just focusing about the debt and not thinking longer term, that can, that has its own issues. So if an individual has debt under control and they have a plan and they have a basic budget set out, what, from your perspective, when you're talking to employees, what are the kind of key benefits of saving and investing in the future? Especially, it's a lot of people who haven't got the saving habit. Maybe they didn't see their parents save. Sometimes these things, if we haven't seen it or witnessed it, we don't, maybe at an early stage in our career, we're not thinking, we're just thinking about disposable income or paying the rent. So, what are those kind of key benefits from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, firstly, congratulations if you've got yourself out of debt, if you're managing things well, recognize that. That's a good step beyond a lot of people. But we like to keep it simple, and we might relate it to, let's say, getting fitter. Doesn't matter how fit you are, most people can get fitter. So you're now at the situation where you've got debt under control. And using the analogy of fitness, if you want to get fitter, it's pretty simple. Just eat less and move more. So the comparison for finances is spend less and save more. So if you simplify it to that, that's always a good starting point. But then how do you do that? So one good tip could be to just set up 2 bank accounts. Now, most people do have 2 bank accounts, a current account and a savings account, but I'd suggest have 2 current accounts. Now, the reason I do that is you have your pay, your incoming, whatever money you've got coming in. And if it just goes out throughout the month, people don't know where they are. So if on if on payday, you move what you want to spend each month into a separate account, that's the account you go to with your cash card. That's the account you spend money from in more of a discretionary way. That means on the first day of your financial month, you can then allocate an amount of money. It could be £1, it could be £10, it could be 100, it could be whatever, but allocate that to a savings or investment at the beginning of the month, not the end of the month. So pay yourself, pay your future first, not last, because on the final day of the month, there'll never be anything left. There'll always be more days left than money. So then where does that money go? Well, that's almost less important. It's the habit that's more important. But it depends on your objectives. If you're saving for a deposit, then maybe that just goes into a higher interest rate savings account. Interest rates have gone up so much, but a lot of bank accounts still pay, I'm going to say bugger all, but virtually no interest. But if you shop around, Money Savings Expert, etc., or through Revolut, these more modern banking apps, you can get 4 or 5% interest. So at least you feel your money is working above inflation. But if you're saving for the longer term, then it should go into something like an ISA. And a stocks and shares ISA, an ISA that's actually going to grow in real terms over time. So again, I wouldn't worry too much about which one. Just getting into the right kind of vehicle will go an awfully long way. And if you're investing for the longer term, again, I don't want to get too technical on this. I like to keep it simple. But volatility is your friend if you're saving on a monthly basis. If things go up and down, that's fine. You want to go into something that in the longer term will consistently produce better results. And then you're really starting to build wealth rather than simply manage day-to-day money.
Yeah. And then kind of aligned to that for organizations, how can employer organizations support that kind of good behavior in your experience, David?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly rare that we see them setting up products to do that. So I think it's more around the things Kingsley talked about, signposting relevant support. It's more about maybe putting in place a financial wellbeing program to, building good foundations. I think I was quite lucky. I'm of that generation where my parents' generation were very thrifty with money. And so, whether you want to or not, you kind of learn that. But my children's generation, it is a different situation. So I think the more you can put in place, whether it's digital, whether it's live sessions, whether it's webinars, just someone to talk to share ideas, because none of the ideas are particularly new, but different ideas will resonate with you at different times of your life. And sometimes hearing something for the third time, well, now might be the right time to take action from that. So just repetition. Don't think that one thing will fix everybody. People aren't there to be fixed. It's just a constant journey of where you want to get to.
And kind of touching on that, and you talked about that kind of intergenerational difference. We're all different depending on what stage or what our priorities are at our stage of life. So your golden rules for retirement planning and saving, and I'm thinking particularly among younger staff who might feel, you know what, that is years away. I don't need to think about that. And they're more, and understandably so, concerned about their disposable income now and paying their bills now.
Yeah.
So that's to you, David.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've got to try and bring it to life. So just showing a slide here, and if I just try and zoom in, if I can work out how to do that. Particularly with the younger generation, if you can visually show people how their future will look, then a picture will paint 1,000 words. And if they can then start to put themselves 30, 40 years down the track and see what it will look like, then hopefully today they'll make better decisions. So particularly with younger people, we like to embrace technology and give them some tools to play with. So in this little example on the screen, we've got Alex, 28, on a good salary, and in a typical what we call auto-enrollment pension. So 5% they're paying in, 3% from the company. And what this little model is doing, and it's a tool that we have on lots of websites for clients, it just shows that, well, according to the government, Alex will work until he or she's 68. That's the state pension age for someone who's 28. And the grey bar is the state pension. Now, from putting all this money into a pension for 40 years, we have these orange bars. And if Alex wants to retire on half of their final salary, then effectively this money will run out before they will. So life expectancy would be age 88. So what we're trying to do is help Alex bridge this gap so that he or she can have the amount of income they want for the future. And there's a number of things you can move. You can retire later. But I've yet to find a 28-year-old who can imagine being 68, let alone working beyond 68. They could take less money. If they take less out, it will last longer. So there are different things you can play with, but we like to show what actions you can take that will really make the difference. And the big two are increasing your contribution. So if we ask Alex's employer to double their contribution, then all of a sudden this orange line, this is the income they get, will go beyond their life expectancy. So we've plugged this hole, but at a cost. They've put twice as much money in. And to most people, that won't be affordable. So the other thing they can do is make better decisions. And this doesn't necessarily cost anything. It's just about education. Most pension schemes will be in a default fund that's of a middle of the road kind of approach. For someone who's 28, they can afford to take a bit more short-term risk to get a better long-term return. And if the employer educates people or puts in place processes to educate people and make better choices, all of a sudden Alex is having a fund that will last way beyond their life expectancy, and they've not needed to put any more money in. They've just made better choices. So it's probably a long way of answering the question, but ultimately it's giving tools to individuals that they can actually see the future and then make it easy to signpost them to making better decisions today on having that clarity in the future.
Great, thank you, David. And I think that kind of brings us, Kingsley. I mean, pensions and retirement, well, pensions generally can feel very complicated to people. I know in the news, you hear, oh, the pension age is rising. But as David says, when you're 28, that probably the thought of working to 68, it feels like a long way off. So that's great if you work in an organization that has some support from an organization like Lemonade. But for individuals who are listening, and they're just looking for some publicly available resources or organizations who could maybe help simplify and support them around their retirement planning, what would you recommend, Kingsley?
Well, the government has an organisation called MAPS. I mentioned it already, the Money and Pension Service. So they've got free advice. So some of the tools that David was talking about, they have those tools on their website where you can see, if I'm 28, how much money am I going to need by the time I get to 68? So again, graphically will show people the amount of money that is needed. So I'd really recommend doing that. The BBC as well, British Broadcasting Corporation, Moneybox, again, going onto their website, they've not just got things that like David was talking about, they've actually got videos, people actually talking, giving some real examples of real people and using different salaries. So David showed the 50K, but if you're on 28K or you're on 40K, whatever your salary is, showing the amount of money that people will need. And we've also got on Martin Lewis's website as well, moneyexpert.com, again, some very, very practical tools that will help you. And I think you're right, Claire. I can just about remember when I was 28. A lot of the focus when you're 28 is around how do you meet the monthly bills that you've got. However, if we don't start to save, we're just causing ourselves problems for the future. And we're actually starting to build in additional stress that we don't need. Totally agree with David's plan about having two bank accounts. Just makes absolute sense. Start of the month, move some money somewhere else. I'd also just mention in a number of areas around the country, you've got local credit unions. And one of the interesting things about actually opening an account with a local credit union is they haven't got lots of other products. So you're putting your money into somewhere where people aren't going to be approaching you about other products. It's just going to be there, particularly for emergency funds. So that's just something else to think about. The third thing I'd say, particularly on people that are managing on very tight budget, let's not forget cash. Because one of the interesting things about moving to quite a cash weekly economy is that you're seeing the money that you're spending. Now, clearly things like rent and mortgages, you've got direct debits, but particularly when money's really, really tight and we're doing food shopping, actually using cash you see the amount that you're paying. And David talked about different generations. Because we used to have an older generation that just lived on cash. And I think if you talk to those older people, they will all say that actually using cash is a really good way of cutting your spending. And, if we're going out and we go to a pub that only takes, that does still take cash, and quite a lot still do, if you've got £10 or you've got £20 in your pocket, that's all you've got. It can be a limiter as well on what you actually spend. So as part of your strategy and putting together a strategy, don't forget about cash. It can be really, really useful.
It's a great simple tip, really, isn't it? Because also just kind of, scanning your phone all the time, you're just not really, and as you have, maybe you're in the pub and you're having a few more drinks, you're not really noticing. It doesn't, not even taking the money out of the wall. You're not even, you're just pushing, you're doing something on your phone, and it doesn't seem to psychologically maybe compute that I'm spending all this money.
Particularly as well, if you're having this real heart-to-heart with yourself or somebody else, just checking, why are you paying certain bills on a credit card? What made you come to that decision? Why can't you take it out of the bank? Well, if the answer is I haven't got the money in there, let's really start to think about what's happening on a monthly basis here, because we're doing two things. Yes, we're making a payment, but we're just adding into our debt by the means of which we're using to pay that monthly amount. And again, you mentioned about the phone. So what cards are on your phone? And how often are you using the credit card on your phone rather than your debit card? So again, is that helping or not? And I think sometimes it's asking ourselves these tough questions can sometimes help us to change our behavior. Because the use of credit, again, Citizens Advice, moneyexpert.com, they've got quite a few articles on how people use credit. And I think there's a real lack of understanding out there. And I used to have it as well, so I can empathise on what 24% means, or 26%, or APR, or some of these things that actually, do you actually understand what's going to happen over 6 months and 12 months if I just carry on using particular vehicles to service debt and service purchases?
Yeah, just compounds the problem. And that kind of brings me on to my next question. The kind of lack of general financial education. I mean, even when you start talking to maybe financial services organizations, they'll use terms or abbreviations and assuming that we all understand it. And as you say, APR is a classic one, where probably, unless I guess maybe you were in a family and somebody mentioned it to you, or your parents, brought that up. Where do you hear that kind of stuff? So I suppose that general financial education and being able to kind of educate yourself just more around all the terms out there. What organizations exist that might provide that kind of support, Kingsley?
Well, the two I think that puts things in the simplest way is BBC and the BBC Money Box. They talk about things like we just talked about. What does a credit card do? What is APR? So you can actually go on their site and watch videos of people explaining that in everyday language, not financial services language. And the other one is actually moneyexpert.com, because I think people like Martin Lewis have got a very good, if I can use the word, street way of just talking about what we should be using different products for, because things like credit cards are really, really useful. But we need to use them in the right way for the right things. And certainly paying direct debits or paying off other debt using credit cards is not what they were designed to do. So but BBC Money Box and moneyexpert.com is the two that I think give real simple answers to that. There are a couple of banks that do go out there. If anybody's on this call who's a school governor, certainly Barclays and Santander are two banks that certainly, where they still have branches, you may be able to get local people who go out, because both of those organisations have packages that have been, and I've seen them used in schools, which again can be really useful for things like, particularly people in probably 15 and upwards. Absolutely. Yeah, so those are two you might want to consider contacting in your local area.
Yeah, that makes complete. I think that financial education in schools is just really, really important. And if people can reach out to those banks, I would encourage them. Kind of brings me back. I mean, some of what you've said, Kingsley, that analogy you used, David, around physical health, or if we want to get fitter or lose weight. We eat less and exercise more, move more, and you're talking about spending less and save more, and it's a lot of this is habitual. And if we can break bad habits, but bring in better and good habits, I know it's easier said than done, but it's breaking it down that way. And probably sharing your problems helps with that, and talking to somebody else. So on that point, David, what advice would you give to an employer? Because, I've been there, I've uncovered issues with members of staff that I just wasn't aware. I could tell there was something wrong. Generally, they didn't seem themselves, or they weren't performing. And actually, sometimes people who are earning quite well, but they had serious financial issues that they just, habitually had been trying to ignore, or just hadn't got on top of. And I think employers do uncover these situations a lot. So what kind of advice do you give to them when they uncover those issues with a member of staff, and how they, when they want to help them navigate that kind of challenge, because it's impacting on their mental, physical health, and probably their work performance as well?
Yeah, you make a good point, because often we think it's the people on the lower incomes that struggle more. And I'm not going to say that they don't, but often we do see people on very big incomes, and they just have bigger problems because they've got bad habits, and those bad habits just, escalate. They're really hard questions, or very hard conversations to have. I can think of people who've had to go to their line manager and say, I can't afford to get to work. I need some money to buy the bus ticket or the train ticket. That's hard to ask, but it's also hard to receive, because what can you do? So I think it comes back to having a financial wellbeing program linked in with the general wellbeing program. But if you're in a business with only 3 or 5 or 10 people, it's not that likely to happen. And hence what Kingsley's been talking about is really, really key. So having that program, but also, are there any products out there that corporately can help? So there are things like salary finance that can help manage debt effectively, using a payroll deduction to aggregate certain debt components together, or Hasty, which is a way of, rather than going to a payday lender, effectively you're going to your employer and you can get an advance on pay, but it's not an employer decision. They've got an app that effectively manages it for you. So there are some actual tools, solutions that could be there, but ultimately it also comes down to, is there somebody you can talk to? How's that signposted? But then you've got a resourcing issue.
Yeah, understand. I mean, I'm seeing more and more, you're right, the larger organizations are appointing heads of well-being, to look at everything, and holistically financial well-being is part of that. But, that's great if you work for a big, maybe blue chip or a larger organization. And Kingsley, kind of probably the same question to you, again, from your experience in citizen advice, you'll have seen people come in with serious financial issues. So that kind of first step in terms of helping them navigate those.
Yeah, I think that, again, for people perhaps who are HR professionals that are on this call, I mean, I'd be asking that question internally following this. So if you've nothing set up, I guess the action following this is, well, why haven't we got something set up? So I signposted earlier, CIPD, Chartered Institute of Personal Development. They've actually got guidelines on how to actually set up a wellbeing policy. It could be you've got a pension partner like David or somebody else that could give you help or best practice in terms of setting one up. So if we haven't got a policy, why haven't we got a policy? Let's set one up. I think secondly, it's if somebody approaches us with a financial issue, latest figures are 75% of the country answering a recent survey said that they've got financial problems. Well, that's 3/4 of the workforce here. And as David said, your income level does not actually sometimes help you here, because people with higher incomes, you've usually got more outgoings. Yeah, because that's the nature, isn't it? If you get more money, a lot of us actually spend it. So income level isn't always the case. So I think it's having a policy, being open, actually welcoming the fact that you could be the first person that they talk to. And some of what you're doing is you're signposting to other organizations professionally, just as if somebody came to you and they got an issue, I don't know, other issues, you probably signpost them to professional help that's out there. Somebody approached you about mental health, well, you might talk to them about how, have you been on the Mind website? Have you seen some of the best practices out there? So some of this is welcoming it. It's okay to talk, where I think if we went back 10 years, I think most employers would say this is nothing to do with us. I think since the issues we've been through in this country in the last 5 years, I think most organisations now would accept that a large proportion of their workforce will have issues around finance. They just will. So I think it's being open and being able to signpost. And are there any practical solutions in the short term that people might be able to help somebody with? And if you have a corporate responsibility, you have got a charity pot of money in your organisation. It's great to support other charities, but why aren't you perhaps supporting a local debt charity? Is there an opportunity locally to partner with an organisation that might be able to come in, give help either in a workshop or get an appointment quickly? And why not use some of your corporate responsibility money to actually give a donation locally, rather than necessarily just supporting some national charity? And I know not every organisation can do that, but perhaps do we need to look again at the support that we give to charities? Why aren't we giving any support, he says, speaking as an ex-citizens advice person, to charities that actually help people in this particular area?
You're on the front line. So
precisely.
75% of people having financial challenges.
Yes.
Another survey I saw, 6.7 million people having financial difficulty.
Yes. Yes.
And energy debts alone are at a record high of 3.1 billion. So there's a lot of this about.
Absolutely.
And David, just to kind of cover that one off, I've seen a survey from in one of the HR specialist publications where financial well-being in the workplace is really key for employees. And a survey we did, we saw that the top two things that they want from their employers is flexible benefits. 48% said that was important to them. Salary transparency, 29%. Then financial education workshops, 11%, and employee assistance programs, 12%. So there is a lot of need around there. So those tips in terms of maybe addressing some of those areas, David, what would you say to employers if they wanted to pick those up head on?
Yeah, as Kingsley said, if you start off with asking some questions, what is the need? What resource have we got? What can we do? And then just, even if it's just some quick wins. So for example, 2 years ago, I'd say the energy crisis was the biggest driver here. Now for a lot of our clients, it's actually the mortgage. It's coming to the end of a remortgage and really panicking that rates could have tripled, during their current deal, and how they're going to keep a roof over their head. What else can they cut back? So we're doing free mortgage webinars for all of our clients and prospects, just because it doesn't matter whether there's 50 people on the call or 5,000 people on the call. It's just sharing, what's coming up. So sessions on, how to remortgage this year, or how to get on the housing ladder. So just trying to get some quick wins can be good. Maybe while you build out a more well thought through strategy, which might take a bit of cash and time from the business. And a big part of that, having a wellbeing champion. And so whether that's one person to cover all 4 pillars or one for each, will depend on the size of your organization.
Yeah, great. Thank you, David. I'd like to pick up on a question that we've had, and I think this is a big one, actually. Probably a lot of people it'll resonate. Somebody asking, how do I balance personal needs and other requests from family and friends? So this person saying they're not prioritizing their own needs enough because they want to meet the need of that need or of someone else. So I think, a lot of people can find themselves in that situation where maybe they're seen in their family network as someone everyone can go to, and it's very hard to say no, but the balance on that. Kingsley, can I go to you first
Yeah,
of all?
yeah, I saw that question. I mean, if it was me, I'd be using the budgeting tool. I'd actually, if I felt I was under that pressure, particularly from a close friend or family, I'd be saying, actually, no, I can't help you. Would you like to see my budget? Would you like to see what my monthly income is? Would you like to see what my monthly outgoings are? And would you like to see my debts? Because actually, you've got a compelling reason why you're saying no. So that might be just a way of saying no, but actually, if they want to see the information, then they can. And I think this being in control of your money actually gives you the confidence, or saying, "Well, I'm really sorry. I don't know if you're aware. I'm actually getting external help to manage my debts at the moment." So again, using the action plan that you've got as the way of saying no. Um,
Yeah,
that's what I would do.
and maybe signposting that individual to
Absolutely.
places that they can go, because really,
Yeah.
regardless
Yeah.
of family or friendships, you
Yeah.
can't. We're all trying to keep our own head above water, and you can't bail everybody out. And
Yeah. Or
yeah,
are there areas where we can work together? So the issue you need more money is transport costs. Well, could we job share? Could we car share? What are
yeah,
the things that we could actually work on together? Certainly where I live, certainly some people have got through, because it's a rural area, buying oil. Actually, it's made up actually about 60 people clubbed together to actually buy oil together.
yeah,
So it's actually by sharing an issue, it's actually brought people together, which then got a lower price from the supplier. So I think it's thinking of practical things that you could work together with them to help rather than giving them the money.
yeah. That makes sense, David. I don't know whether you've got anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd rather give a fishing rod than a fish kind of approach to
Yeah,
it. But it can be nice to say yes. But often the person that is saying yes is in a harder situation than the person they're giving to, but they just manage things better. So it's kind of give some wisdom rather than just the cash. It's a short-term plaster quite often. And certainly within our team, I recently gave everyone in the team a book that I'd read that I found really useful to help manage money and do different things. The 2 bank account ideas came from that. So if you have some good practice, pass that on, whether it's the signposting Kingsley said or something else. But if someone's encouraged to read a book, they become more vested in the solution,
yeah,
because a lot of us don't read as much as maybe we should. And it's just so easy to go online. But similarly, there's a resource on Netflix now about
yeah.
this. It hasn't quite got the taboo it used to have in terms of talking about money. So yeah, I would encourage people to talk more.
Yeah, because actually we've talked about habits, and this is a bad habit. If people in your network, your family are reaching out to you all the time, it is a sticking plaster, and it's probably short term, but it's not going to help them long term. Yeah, and I know it's hard to say no. Probably all been in that situation, but yeah, won't solve a longer term issue. Well, thank you everyone who's joined us this morning. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all we've got time for today. We've talked about a lot and mentioned a lot of organizations and signposted to some resources. So just in terms of that, a recording of the session, as well as all those links and information that we mentioned, And also contact details for our speakers today will go around in that follow-up. So you know, anyone who signed up today will get that by email. So watch out for that in the next 24 hours, and feel free to share that on with anyone else you feel may find it of use. But I also want to say a massive thank you to my two expert speakers today, to David and to Kingsley. Thank you both for your wisdom, your expertise, and your time. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.